Clinic Director Hartman was sure he had calculated everything perfectly. To save his position and the hospital's reputation, he coldly accused the best surgeon of criminal negligence. The sentence was brutal: a transfer to a remote settlement, hundreds of miles of impassable forest from the nearest town. He thought that fragile city woman would break within a week. But fate loves cruel jokes. The water was ice cold, but Olivia barely felt it. She scrubbed her hands with a stiff brush until her fingertips turned bright red. November wind rattled outside the window. The calendar said 1995, a time when a human life was worth less than a pack of cigarettes, and the Hippocratic oath sounded like a bad joke. Olivia looked at the cloudy mirror above the sink. A tired 42-year-old woman stared back at her. A tight knot of dark hair streaked with silver dark circles under her eyes. But her gaze was the same as ever, sharp, focused, scanning. The gaze of a surgeon used to making decisions in fractions of a second. Olivia! The door cracked open, and the head of a very young nurse, Jenny, poked through the gap. Her voice was shaking. "Those guys are here, demanding the chief." "Who are those guys, Jenny? Talk clearly." "The ones in the Jeep. They got into a fight. They brought in one really bad, and they're yelling that every doctor has to go to him or they'll tear the hospital apart." Olivia dried her hands with a towel and stepped into the hallway. Two heavy-set men in leather jackets were dragging a third between them. He was wheezing, clutching his side. Nearby, a pale intern named Paul was hovering nervously. "Where's the chief?" one of them barked, fingering a gold chain. "Our guy needs saving. Who's the best surgeon? You?" He jabbed a finger into Paul's chest. Paul swallowed. "I'm just an assistant." "I'm the surgeon," Olivia said firmly, stepping forward. "What's wrong with him?" "Gunshot wound. In the stomach. Move it." "If Big Kenny dies, you're all dead." At that moment, doors flew open at the far end of the hallway. "Doctor, help! She was hit by a car. A little girl, she's only 7. Olivia rushed to the gurney. The child was unconscious, her face white as chalk, her breathing broken and whistling. Her trained eye immediately caught the unnatural twist of the ribcage, pneumothorax, possible ruptured spleen. Minutes mattered. "To OR1 now. Paul, get anesthesia ready. Blood type, fast." "Hey, where do you think you're going?" The thug stepped in front of her. "Our guy first. The girl can wait." "The little girl has internal bleeding," Olivia said, looking him straight in the eye. "She won't make it. Your wounded man is conscious, and his blood pressure is stable. The on-call team will take him." "You think you're immortal or something?" he said, stepping right up to her. "If Big Kenny dies, I'll break your hands. What are you going to cut with then?" A sharp silence fell over the hallway. The only sounds were the buzzing fluorescent lights overhead and the little girl's mother sobbing. Olivia felt a chill crawl down her spine, but fear gave way to icy fury. "Take your hands off me," she said quietly, but loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I'm a doctor. I decide who gets treated first based on medical need. If you don't get out of my way, I'll call the police." At that moment, Chief of Staff Hartman appeared in the hallway. He came hurrying in with quick little steps, dabbing his bald head with a handkerchief. "What is going on? Gentlemen, please calm down. Olivia, take this patient to OR1 immediately. These are important people." "The child is going into OR1, Olivia snapped. "The girl has a collapsed lung. Are you a surgeon or an administrator?" Hartman went pale. He knew she was right, but he also knew whose Jeep was parked outside. "That's an order," he shrieked. "Leave the girl to Peterson, let him handle it. You're going to the man." Peterson was a trauma doctor. He would never pull off an operation like that. Olivia was already pushing the gurney forward, brushing aside the thug who hesitated in front of her. "I'm going into surgery, and you, Dr. Hartman, can do whatever you want." The operating room doors slammed shut behind her. This was her world. A world of sterile cleanliness, cold light, and precise action. Scalpel, clamp, suction. Time compressed into a tight spring. Her hands worked on their own, guided by reflexes sharpened over years. The little body on the table looked so fragile. Olivia fought for every beat of that tiny heart, forgetting everything happening beyond those doors. She had no idea that in the next operating room, a young intern with shaking hands was trying to remove a bullet and nicked a major artery. Olivia finished 3 hours later. The little girl was breathing evenly. She would live. Olivia peeled the wet mask from her face and yanked off her gloves. The door burst open with a bang. Hartman stood in the doorway, his tie crooked, his face blotched red. "Do you understand what you've done? Big Kenny died on the table. His people are tearing up the entire first floor. They promised to bury the one who operated on him, and the one who refused. What does that have to do with me? I couldn't abandon a child. They don't care." Hartman grabbed her by the shoulders. "They think you let him die on purpose. They already know your name. Bennett, you're finished, and I'm finished too if I don't hand you over." "You're going to hand me over?" She stared at him, no longer recognizing the man she had worked with for 15 years. "I already told them I fired you for negligence, that you were drunk, that I couldn't stop you. You lied about me to cover your own cowardice?" "I was saving myself and the hospital. This way there's a clear guilty party. You." He pulled a folder out of a desk drawer. "Here's your termination order. Sign it." "I won't," she said quietly. "You fool! They'll be waiting for you outside your house tonight. Olivia, there are no laws for people like them, but I have an option." He threw a map onto the desk. His finger jabbed at a green emptiness in the north where there were barely any roads. "Cedar Falls, 200 miles from the nearest station. Wilderness bears. The medic there died a month ago and nobody wants to go. You can hide out until things calm down." "I'm a top-level surgeon," Olivia said, her voice trembling. "And you're sending me into exile? I'm saving you. If you don't disappear tonight, tomorrow they'll find you in a ditch. I already worked it out with the administration. We'll do it as a transfer. Nobody will look for you there." Olivia walked to the window. Down below, 2 black Jeeps were parked by the entrance with their headlights on. They were waiting. She looked at her hands. They weren't shaking. "All right, give me the papers." Packing was quick. The apartment that had seemed like a fortress just yesterday suddenly felt foreign. The crystal vase, her mother's gift. The books collected over a lifetime. The cozy throw blanket. All of it was staying here, in her old life. Into the old suitcase went only the essentials. Warm sweaters, a change of clothes, a few photographs, and of course her instruments. Her personal set of scalpels, a stethoscope, an emergency surgery handbook, the things that made up the core of who she was. The train left at midnight. The platform was flooded with the dim light of lamps. The air smelled of wet coal and fuel oil. Olivia turned up the collar of her coat, trying to hide her face. She kept feeling like at any second a leather jacket would step out of the dark and metal would flash. She stepped into the compartment, threw the suitcase onto the upper rack, sat by the window, and pressed her forehead to the cold glass. The train lurched and slowly pulled away from the city that had betrayed her. House lights drifted by, then garages, then black gaps of parks. Somewhere back there her name remained, her reputation, trampled by a man she had once considered a colleague. "It's fine. I'll survive. A doctor is needed everywhere." The wheels clattered in a steady rhythm. Away, away, away. Ahead of her was night and the unknown. But right then, staring into the darkness, Olivia was able to take a full breath for the first time all day. She had made her choice, and she did not regret it. The train jerked one last time and stopped. Beyond the window stood a primitive, solid darkness, with not a single light visible in it. "Cedar Falls Station," the conductor said indifferently. 2-minute stop. If you're getting off, move it." Olivia struggled to pull the heavy suitcase down from the rack. She threw on her coat and stepped into the vestibule. The door slid open with a screech, and a blast of cold hit her face so hard it stole her breath. The air here was different, dry, sharp, ringing. She jumped down onto the snow-dusted platform. The snow crunched under her soul like a gunshot. There was no one around, only a boarded-up caretaker's shack. The train started moving almost immediately. A minute later, Olivia was standing alone in the middle of the forest. The silence came down on her like a concrete slab. "You the doctor or what?" A raspy voice came out of the darkness. A little man in a huge sheepskin coat and fur hat stepped out of the shadows. Beside him stood an old SUV she hadn't even noticed behind a snowbank. "I'm a physician," she corrected him, trying to keep her voice firm. "Olivia?" "I don't care," the little man said, spitting into the snow. "They told me to pick you up. Get in before the engine cools off." The inside of the vehicle smelled like gasoline, tobacco, and wet dog. The heater hummed, but gave off almost no warmth. Snowflakes danced in the headlights beyond the windshield. There wasn't really a road, just tracks between ancient spruce trees. The trees stood like a wall, huge and black, hanging over the road like guards from another world. "How much farther?" she asked. 30 miles or so. "So what did you forget out here? Get exiled, or did you come on your own? The last medic died a month ago, drank himself to death from loneliness." "I came here to work," Olivia answered dryly. The driver grunted. Apparently, he had decided the city woman wouldn't last long. The settlement of Cedar Falls rose out of the darkness without warning. Low wooden houses half buried in snowdrifts, a few yellow squares of light, barking dogs. The driver stopped in front of a long, squat building on the edge of town. "We're here." He helped pull out the suitcase and set it in the snow. "Keys above the door, firewood's in the shed, water's from the well 2 houses down." He slammed the door and drove off. The red taillights disappeared into the blowing snow. Olivia remained standing in front of the dark building. The wind lashed her face. She found the key, struggled to turn it in the frozen lock. The door gave way with a long groan. Inside, it was colder than outside. The smell of an uninhabited place hit her at once. Dust, dried herbs. Olivia flicked her lighter. The little flame pulled whitewashed walls out of the dark, an old wooden table, an iron bed with a bare mattress, and a huge stove that took up half the room. "My God," she whispered, and her breath hung in the air in a pale cloud. She needed to get the stove going. She went back outside, found the firewood, and dragged it in. The stove stared at her with the black mouth of its firebox. Olivia had never lit a wood-burning stove in her life. She had always had gas heat. She packed the firebox with old newspapers, shoved in the logs, and lit the paper. The fire caught cheerfully, but a minute later the room filled with bitter smoke. It stung her eyes and clawed at her throat. Olivia rushed around the cabin, not understanding what she was doing wrong. Her eyes watered. She felt helpless and unbearably alone. A great surgeon who saved lives couldn't handle a stove. Suddenly, the front door flew open so hard it slammed into the wall. A huge figure appeared in the doorway. "You trying to gas yourself to death or burn the whole settlement down?" The voice was low and rumbling. The man stepped inside and moved her aside with his shoulder. He was tall, broad-boned, his face hidden behind a thick beard streaked with gray. A pale old scar ran across his left cheek from the cheekbone to the ear. He reached a hand over the damper, shifted something with a metallic clang. The smoke pulled into the chimney. Then he crouched down, adjusted the logs with the poker, and tossed in kindling. His movements were precise and confident. Olivia stood in the open doorway, wiping her tears with the sleeve of her coat and greedily gulping down the freezing air. The stranger stood up and turned toward her. His gaze was heavy, appraising. He was looking not at her face, but at her hands, thin, long-fingered, reddened by the cold and soot. "City girl," he said, not asking but stating it. And they say you're a surgeon. Yes. Olivia straightened up. Olivia? And who are you? And why are you barging in without knocking? Greg, local game warden, I'll knock when you stop trying to burn the place down. He smirked, but the smile never reached his eyes. This isn't the city. The woods don't like the weak. And from what I can see, you're not doing too great so far. I didn't ask for help. I would have figured it out. Sure, by morning they'd be carrying you out cold. He nodded toward the stove. Don't shove wet firewood in there. Start with birch bark. He walked out without saying goodbye, then came back 10 minutes later with 2 buckets of water. He set them down by the door. Here, wash up. The supervisor will stop by tomorrow. And then he disappeared into the night. Olivia leaned against the door and slid down onto the floor. Her legs were shaking. The stove hummed with an even flame. Warmth was slowly spreading through the room, but inside her, everything was still ice. She looked at her hands, the same hands that had held a child's life just yesterday. Here, they were worth nothing if they couldn't even open the stove damper. The morning began with knocking on the window. Olivia opened her eyes with difficulty. She had slept in her coat, wrapped in an old blanket she had found in the closet. The stove had gone cold overnight. Outside the window stood a woman, full-figured, rosy-cheeked, wearing a bright floral headscarf. She was shamelessly peering into the house. Olivia got up, straightened her clothes, and smoothed her hair. It's open! The door creaked. The woman came in, bringing with her the smell of frost and fresh bread. Hello, I'm Cindy, the store clerk. Brought you some bread. She set a loaf of still warm bread on the table. Thank you, Olivia said, caught off guard. My name is Olivia. Oh, we know, Cindy said with a sly squint. The whole village is buzzing. They say they sent you all the way from the city. Some kind of professor. So why'd they send you? You do something? Contract work. Rural experience was needed, Olivia answered dryly. Cindy gave her a doubtful snort, looking her up and down. Her gaze lingered on the leather boots, on the gold chain under Olivia's sweater. Uh-huh. Experience. Listen, Doc, take a look at my hand. She shoved her right palm under Olivia's nose. The fingers were rough, cracked, and there was an ugly lump on the wrist. It aches so bad I can't stand it. When the weather changes, I feel like climbing the walls. Olivia automatically switched into work mode. She carefully felt the joint. The skin was warm, inflamed. A ganglion cyst, possibly early arthritis. You need to limit the strain here. Lift less weight. Cindy threw her head back and laughed. Lift less? Oh, that's rich. And who's supposed to milk the cow? Carry the water? Unload the store deliveries? My husband drinks. She yanked her hand away. All right, I'm going. You come by if you need anything. And be careful with your advice. Around here, people have to work, not protect themselves. Cindy left, leaving behind the smell of bread and a strange feeling of awkwardness. Olivia realized it had been a test, and she had failed it. Perfectly correct medical advice had turned out to be completely useless in real life. She cut herself a slice of bread, poured ice-cold water, and ate standing up, looking out the window at the gray houses and the smoke rising in columns into the sky. An hour later, she went into the medical station, which occupied the other half of the house. It was a wreck. The cabinets were empty, old forms lay dusty on the floor, and in the corner stood an exam table with ripped upholstery. As for medicine, there was only iodine, antiseptic green, and a mountain of expired aspirin. Welcome to hell, she said out loud. She spent the whole day washing, scrubbing, and throwing out trash. She had to haul water from the well, and every time she felt eyes on her from behind curtains. The settlement was watching. The settlement was waiting for her to break. By evening, Olivia had heated the stove, sat down at the table, and laid a clean sheet of paper in front of her. She needed to make a list of essentials: medication, bandages, syringes. She would write to the organization, ask for supplies, get what she could. But the hand holding the pen froze. In the silence, a floorboard suddenly creaked clearly. Then another one. Fear came over her all at once. Not the sharp fear she had felt in the operating room with the gangsters, but the sticky, dragging horror of loneliness. She was completely alone here. If something happened, no one would know. Greg had made it perfectly clear that he didn't like her. Cindy would only laugh. A year. 365 days in this frozen wilderness. There was a soft, uncertain knock. "Who is it?" "Doctor, open up." The voice was a child's, scared. Olivia rushed to the door. On the doorstep stood a boy of about 10, bareheaded, in an unzipped jacket, his face twisted with pain. He was clutching his right hand to his chest, wrapped in a blood-soaked rag. "What happened?" "With an axe. I was trying to split a log and missed. My finger. It's hanging." Olivia pulled him inside and sat him under the lamp. "Easy. Don't cry. Let's take a look." She unwrapped the rag. The index finger was hanging on by a literal flap of skin. The bone had been chopped through and tendons stuck out in white threads. In the city, she would have called microsurgeons. Here, there was only her expired Novocaine and the instrument kit in her suitcase. "What's your name?" "Timmy," the boy whispered, staring at the syringe with eyes wide with terror. "Timmy, right now you're getting a shot. It'll feel like a mosquito bite, and then we're going to put your finger back where it belongs. You're a man, aren't you?" "A man," Timmy nodded, even though tears were running down his cheeks. Olivia worked fast. The hands that couldn't open a stove damper that morning were now flying. Numb the wound, apply a tourniquet, scalpel, clamp, needle. She was rebuilding the finger like a puzzle, matching tissue and stitching vessels together. The light was poor, the lamp flickered, but she could see everything with her inner vision. The door opened. She didn't even turn around. "Hold the light!" she threw into the room. Heavy footsteps came closer. Someone big stepped up beside her, blocking the draft. Into the circle of light stretched a hand holding a powerful army flashlight. The beam hit the wound exactly. Olivia glanced up for a second. Greg. His face was stone, but something new flickered in his eyes. Not mockery, but interest. "You've got it?" "I've got it." "So," he answered. 40 minutes passed. The last knot was tied. Olivia wrapped the bandage and splinted the finger with a piece of ruler. There was nothing else close at hand. "All right, Timmy. You're going to live. And your finger will work if you listen to me." The boy stared at his bandaged hand like it was a miracle. "Thank you, ma'am." "Dr. Olivia," she corrected him. Greg switched off the flashlight. "Where's his father?" "Asleep drunk," Timmy answered matter-of-factly. "I ran here myself." Greg nodded darkly and looked at Olivia. This time at her face, not her hands. "Not bad," he said. Coming from him, it was the same as a medal. "I'll walk him home and explain to his father that he needs to put the axe away." At the door, he turned back. "I stacked firewood by the porch. Don't close the damper until the fire burns down." The door closed. Olivia was alone again. But now the silence had changed. It was no longer hostile. The house seemed to have accepted her. She looked at the bloodstains on the floor, took a rag, and started scrubbing. Cold water again, work again. But now she knew. She would make it. December hit Cedar Falls with snow. The air rang like a stretched wire, and every breath burned her lungs. Olivia learned to tell the shades of cold apart. If the smoke from the chimneys rose straight up, life was manageable, about 20 below zero. If it hugged the ground, trouble was coming. That morning, there was no smoke visible at all. Outside the window, white nothingness was raging. The blizzard that had started during the night had erased the line between sky and earth. In a month of living here, Olivia had changed. The city paleness was gone. Her hands had turned rough from icy water and firewood. Her gaze had grown heavier. She no longer waited for help. She simply lived. The light bulb overhead flickered and went out. "Of course," she said out loud. The wires stretching through the forest for hundreds of miles snapped every winter. Olivia found the lamp. Through the howl of the wind, another sound broke through. A heavy, straining engine roar. Then a dull crash, the clang of metal and shouting. Olivia wiped a little hole in the icy pattern on the window. A tractor had pulled up to the medical station porch. Two men bundled up to their eyes climbed out of the cab. They were dragging something long, dark, and motionless out of the back. The door burst open with a bang. A man Olivia knew as Frank, the logging foreman, stumbled in. His face was gray. His lips were shaking. "Doctor, take him! A tree pinned the kid. He's young, real young." They carried in a guy around 20. He was wheezing, and with every breath, pink foam bubbled on his lips. "On the table, fast! Cut the clothes off, but carefully." "There's no power, Olivia. How are you supposed to cut?" "Candles, anything you have? Move." She bent over the young man, thread-like pulse. His right chest was caved in. Pneumothorax. Multiple rib fractures, possible torn lung. Internal bleeding. In a normal hospital, this would have been a difficult operation. Here, on a wooden table by lamplight, it was madness. But there was no choice. No helicopter would land in weather like this. The winter road to town was impossible. If she did nothing, the young man would fade out within an hour. The door slammed again. "I brought it," Greg's calm voice said. He set a powerful battery lantern on the table. The beam hit the operating field, bright, white, merciless. "Hold it," Olivia threw at him. "Shine it here. Frank, hold his legs. We don't have real anesthesia. He might jerk." She filled a syringe. The hands that had been freezing under her scarf an hour earlier were now working sharply, like a machine. "Alex, do you hear me?" The young man opened cloudy eyes. "This is going to hurt. Hang on. It'll get easier to breathe." Greg stood motionless. The hand holding the flashlight didn't tremble by even a fraction of an inch. He wasn't looking at the wound, but at Olivia's face, at her pressed lips, at the drops of sweat on her forehead despite the cold. The lung had been torn by a splintered rib. Olivia worked blind, relying on her fingertips and the experience of thousands of surgeries. She placed stitches into living, breathing flesh, feeling life slipping away and grabbing it by the tail. She finished just as the lamp began to burn low. Alex's chest rose and fell evenly. The pink foam was gone. Olivia straightened up and her back answered with savage pain. Her legs buckled. She would have fallen if Greg hadn't caught her by the elbow. Hard, strong, steady. "He alive," Frank whispered. "Alive," Olivia breathed out. "Now the main thing is keeping him warm. Keep the stove going around the clock. Frank, you stay on watch. If he starts turning blue, wake me immediately." She went over to the washstand. There was no water in the tank. Greg disappeared and came back with a bucket of snow, set it on the stove. While the snow melted, Olivia sat on a stool, staring blankly at one spot. The adrenaline was fading, and leaden exhaustion was taking its place. An hour later, when Alex was sleeping under the watch of a suddenly quiet Frank, Olivia went into her own room. Greg was sitting in the corner by the stove. On the table stood an opened bottle of whiskey, 2 glasses, and slices of cheese and bread. "Sit," he said without turning around. "You need it, or you're gonna drop." He poured her half a glass. "Drink it in one shot." She did. The burning liquid dropped into her stomach like a hot lump. Greg handed her a piece of bread. They sat in silence. The storm battered the walls outside, but here, inside the circle of warmth from the stove, it felt safe. "You're not here for no reason," Greg said suddenly. It wasn't a question. "Doctors like you don't come to our backwoods on purpose." Olivia looked at her hands. I let a man die, she said quietly. Greg didn't even raise an eyebrow. On the table? No. I refused to operate on a gangster so I could save a child. The gangster died. They threw me out, told me to be grateful I was still alive. She expected judgment, but Greg stayed silent for a long time, staring into the fire. My wife died 7 years ago, he said in a dull voice. Appendicitis. Simple appendicitis. The medic was drunk, and they wouldn't send a helicopter from town. Budget limits. I carried her in my arms all the way to the boat. Thought I'd make it myself. I didn't. She went cold in my arms, right there in the middle of the river. Silence settled over the room. For the first time, Olivia saw behind the harsh mask a man burned hollow by grief. That was why he had looked at her the first day with hatred and hope at the same time. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I swore back then." He tightened his grip on the glass. "But today you fought like a she-wolf for some stranger's kid in the dark." He raised his eyes to hers. There was no more ice in them now. There was pain, but there was warmth, too. "You're a real doctor, Olivia. Out here, everything shows exactly as it is. Who's rotten and who's steel." He stood up. "Sleep. I'll sit with Frank. I'll wake you if anything happens. You don't have to lock the door. These are our own people here." The door closed. Olivia pressed her palms against the hot bricks of the stove. For the first time in a month, she felt truly warm. Not from the whiskey, not from the fire, but from the words of that unsociable man. Back in the city, she had had hundreds of acquaintances, but not one of them would have brought her a bucket of snow and held a flashlight while she cut into living flesh. She lay down in bed. The wind was still howling outside, but now it sounded like a lullaby. The next morning, the storm had passed. The sun rolled out across the sky, turning the snowdrifts into scattered diamonds. Olivia stepped onto the porch, squinting in the light. Cindy came up to the steps pulling a sled behind her. "I heard," she said instead of hello, looking away, "that you pulled Alex through. He's my nephew, second cousin's boy." Cindy sniffed, pulled a jar out of her pocket. "Here, honey, and milk. Take it. Take it. You need your strength." She shoved the jar into Olivia's hands and quickly started walking away, then turned and called out, "And I'm heating up the bathhouse for you on Saturday. Come by. No reason for you to keep acting like a stranger." Olivia stood on the porch, holding the jar of honey to her chest and smiling. Life went on, and it seemed like she was finally starting to like it. Spring came mean and drawn out. The snow turned into gray, sucking slush, and the roads washed out so badly that even all-terrain trucks sank up to their axles in mud. Cedar Falls was cut off from the world again. Olivia sat by the radio, trying to catch the news through the crackle of static. The announcer dryly reported delayed paychecks, shootings in the city, and then something that made her heart clench. A group of especially dangerous repeat offenders had escaped from a maximum security prison in the neighboring county. Armed and extremely dangerous. Residents of nearby areas were advised to stay alert. The announcer's voice drowned in a hiss of interference. Olivia switched the radio off. In 6 months, she had grown used to the sounds of this house, to the smell of damp wood, to the loneliness. The medical station had been put in order. The cabinets gleamed, the instruments had been boiled clean, and the patient files lay in a neat stack. She walked to the window. It was getting dark. The streets of the settlement were empty. There was no light in the house across from hers, where Greg lived. He had gone into the woods that morning and said he'd be back by nightfall, though he might spend the night in the hunting cabin. From the direction of the forest came the roar of an engine. Locals didn't drive in weather like this. They saved their equipment. A minute later, an SUV with no license plates, splattered with mud all the way up to the roof, screeched to a stop by the fence. The headlights went dark, but the engine kept idling. 2 men got out. Olivia instinctively stepped back from the window into the shadows. They were not loggers. Their movements were sharp, jerky, like hunted animals. One of them, tall and hunched, was supporting the other, who was dragging one leg. They headed straight for the porch. They didn't knock. The door shuddered under a powerful kick. The flimsy lock flew out. "Anybody alive in here?" a voice barked, full of pain and rage. Olivia grabbed a heavy metal clamp from the table, a ridiculous weapon, but her hands moved on their own. She stepped into the hallway. "I'm here. What do you want?" Two men stood in the doorway. The healthy one was holding a sawed-off hunting shotgun. The barrel was pointed straight at her stomach. His face was the color of dirt, his eyes sunken, and on his neck was a blue tattoo, a spider in a web. "Doctor!" He spat onto the clean floor. "Lucky break. Take the patient." He shoved his partner forward. The man groaned and slid down the wall, leaving a brown streak behind him. Bullet in the thigh. Been carrying him around since yesterday. Fever, delirious. Get it out. "I'm not a surgeon," Olivia lied, feeling her mouth go dry. "I'm just a medic. I don't have the facilities." "Don't lie." The thug stepped toward her and pressed the cold metal to her forehead. He smelled of sweat, rotten teeth, and gun oil. "The village said there's some city professor lady living here, Golden Hands. So come on, Golden Hands, get to work. If he dies, you're next." Olivia looked at the wounded man. About 25, his face burning with fever, lips cracked. The leg of his jeans was soaked with blood that had started drying into a black crust. Infection had already begun. She could see that from here. "Into the operating room. Put him on the table. Turn on the light. The switch is on the right." The fear was gone, driven into some far corner. All that remained was cold calculation. She washed her hands, trying not to look at her reflection in the mirror. Gangsters again. Threats again. It was as if fate were mocking her, showing her that there was no running away. "There's no proper anesthesia," she said as she entered the operating room. "Only Novocaine. It's going to hurt." "He doesn't care," the older one muttered, sitting down by the door with the sawed-off shotgun across his knees. "As long as he doesn't die. One wrong move and I'll put a hole in your head. Got it?" "Got it." Olivia cut through the jeans. The wound was bad. The bullet had gone deep into the soft tissue, nicked the bone, but missed the artery. A miracle. The skin around the entry wound was dark red and hot. Gas gangrene hadn't started yet, but it was standing right at the threshold. "Hold him down! He's going to jerk! If my hand slips, I'll cut a vessel and he'll bleed out in 2 minutes." Reluctantly, the thug stood up and leaned his weight onto his partner's chest. Olivia made the incision. The wounded man groaned through clenched teeth and arched off the table. The operating room filled with the smell of pus and fresh blood. She worked with the scalpel, feeling the resistance of tissue through the blade. Right now, everything was in her hands. One small movement to the side, and the femoral artery would be severed. She caught the bullet with the forceps. A piece of lead dropped into the metal tray. "Now I clean it out and stitch it." At that moment, through the noise of the rain outside, she heard the crack of a branch. Quiet, almost impossible to catch. The thug jerked his head up. "What was that?" "Branches," Olivia said loudly, trying to cover the sound. "The wind's picking up." "Hold him tighter, I'm flushing it with peroxide now. It burns." The thug bent over the table again, but now his eyes were darting around the room. The operating room door was slightly open. In the dark hallway, a shadow moved. Huge. Silent. Greg. How he knew didn't matter. He had seen the light, noticed the car. He was here. She needed to distract the thug for 1 second. "All right, I'm stitching. I need help. Hand me that ampule from the table." "Get it yourself. I'm sterile. If I touch anything non-sterile, he'll get blood poisoning. You want to haul out a corpse?" The thug cursed, let go of the wounded man, and reached toward the instrument table, turning his back to the door for 1 second. That moment was enough. Greg came out of the dark hallway. In his hand, a hunting knife gave off a dull flash. He didn't stab him. He simply locked a powerful arm around the thug's neck and yanked him backward. The sawed-off shotgun exploded, blasting a load of buckshot into the ceiling. Plaster rained down. Olivia dropped to the floor, covering her head with her hands. The instrument table went over with a horrible crash. The thug was strong and wiry, twisting, trying to kick Greg off him, but the game warden held him in a dead grip, slowly cutting off his carotid artery. The wounded man on the table tried to lift himself, groping for a weapon. Olivia grabbed a heavy metal tray and brought it down on his head with all her strength. "Stay down!" The man went limp. A minute later, it was over. The older one lay on the floor, bound with straps from the gurney, wheezing and staring at Greg with bloodshot eyes. Greg was breathing hard, wiping sweat from his forehead. A scrape was swelling on his cheekbone. "You okay?" he asked, turning to Olivia. She was sitting on the floor among scattered ampules and bandages. The hands that had just been holding the scalpel so steadily were now shaking with a fine tremor. "I'm okay. I got the bullet out." Greg lifted her off the floor like she weighed nothing and pulled her against him. He smelled of rain, pine, and gunpowder. "Easy, easy. It's over. They're done running." Olivia buried her face in his wet jacket. The tears she had been holding back for 6 months came pouring out. "They were just like back then with the gun, and I couldn't—" "I know, Olivia, I know. You did great. I wouldn't have made it in time if you hadn't distracted him." They stood there like that for 5 minutes in the wrecked operating room under the flickering light bulb. 2 lonely people saving each other from a crazy world. Then Greg pulled back. "We need to call the county police. Let them take them. The phone's dead. The lines are down. Then we drive them in tomorrow. For now, we put them in the cellar. It's cold down there. They won't get far. The wounded one needs antibiotics." Greg smirked, a crooked smile, but a kind one. "You're impossible. Give your patient the shot, then come to my place. My stove's hot. No reason for you to stay here tonight." That night, Olivia slept somewhere other than her cold little house for the first time. She slept in Greg's wide bed while he settled on the floor on a bearskin rug with a rifle laid beside him. She lay there with her eyes open, listening to the breathing of the sleeping man. The fear was gone. In its place came a strange, forgotten feeling of safety, like in childhood, when her father used to close the door and say, "I'm here. Don't be afraid of anything." By morning, when a police unit came for the escapees, Greg had managed to get through on the forestry radio after all. The officer shook the game warden's hand for a long time, then walked over to Olivia. "Thank you. These are the same 2 who escaped from Pine River. They've got 3 murders on them just this week alone. You helped us a lot." "Just take them away from here," she said with a tired smile, leaning on Greg's shoulder. The police vehicle drove off, carrying the wolves back to their cage. Olivia and Greg remained standing on the washed-out road. The rain had stopped. Pale spring sky showed through the breaks in the clouds. "So, Doctor," Greg took her hand. His palm was warm and rough. "How about some tea?" "Sounds good," she answered simply. "With raspberry jam." She didn't know whether she would ever return to the city, to major surgery. But now, looking at the profile of this harsh man with the scar, she understood. Her home was here now. The year 2005 came quietly to Cedar Falls, bringing the smell of ripe lingonberries and the first morning frost. The settlement had changed. Where crooked fences had once been rotting, sturdy log houses now stood. Satellite dishes glinted on the roofs. Olivia stood on the porch of the new hospital, not the miserable little medical station anymore, a real 20-bed inpatient clinic built 3 years earlier with money from the logging company. The walls smelled of fresh pine resin and antiseptic. At 52, she looked better than she had at 40. The hunted look was gone, along with that gray film of hopelessness. She no longer dyed the silver in her hair. The lines around her eyes now came not from tears, but from smiling. "Olivia!" called Lucy, the head nurse, hurrying up the path. "Air Med's calling. A flight's coming in from the city." Olivia frowned. They didn't send a helicopter without a serious reason. "What happened?" "They said it's a private case. Some big shot from a major city is bringing in his grandson. The hospitals in the district refused. They said it's too complicated, he won't make it to the city. The dispatcher said, 'Take him to Olivia. Her hands are gold. She'll pull him through.'" Olivia smiled to herself. 10 years ago, people had said her name in a whisper, like a curse. Now they spoke it like a last hope. "Get the operating room ready." "Call the anesthesiologist. Tell him to drop his garden and get here." 20 minutes later, a growing roar rolled over the settlement. A huge white and blue helicopter came down heavily onto the pad behind the hospital. The door flew open. A man in an expensive cashmere coat jumped out, absurdly out of place here in the wilderness. He was shouting something, waving his arms, hurrying the pilots who were pulling out a stretcher. Olivia stepped forward to meet him. The man ran up to her. Old, soft-bodied, face puffy with broken red veins. The stamp of a well-fed but high-strung life, eyes full of animal terror. "Where's the doctor? I need the best. I'll pay any amount. Just save him." Olivia froze. That voice, shrill, cracking into falsetto. She knew that voice. She had heard it 10 years ago when it sent her straight into hell. Hartman, the very man who had destroyed her life to save his own position. He had aged, grown gaunt. There was less authority in him now and 3 times as much fear. He was looking at her and not seeing her. For him, she was just a figure in a white coat. "What's wrong with the child?" Olivia asked coldly. "His stomach. An acute abdomen," Hartman said, gasping for breath. "Those idiots in the city thought it was food poisoning, but it's probably peritonitis by now. It's my grandson, Danny, my only one." A boy of about 7 lay on the stretcher, pale to the point of blue, his little nose sharpened from pain. He was whimpering softly, drawing his knees up to his stomach. Olivia placed a hand on his abdomen, hard as a board. Rebound, tenderness, positive. Rapid pulse. "Diffuse peritonitis. The appendix ruptured. We're down to minutes. Get him to the operating room, now." Hartman hurried after her, grabbing at her sleeve. "Do you even have the conditions here? Proper anesthesia? I'll sue you if anything goes wrong. I'll call the ministry." Olivia stopped sharply. The orderlies carrying the stretcher froze too. She slowly turned and looked him straight in the eyes. "You don't recognize me, Hartman?" He stared harder. First confusion, then sparks of recognition, and finally shock. His mouth fell open. "Olivia? You?" "Me. The same woman you fired for saving a little girl. The same one you sent into the wilderness." Hartman went white. He looked toward the closed operating room doors, where his grandson had already been taken, then back at her. "My God, you're not going to take revenge. He has nothing to do with it. I'm the guilty one, I know that. But he—" There was so much humiliation and fear in his voice that Olivia felt not hatred, but disgust. There it was. The very same echo. 10 years ago, he would have sacrificed someone else's child. Today, he had brought his own to the woman he destroyed. "I'm a doctor, Hartman," she said, and her voice rang with steel. "Unlike you, I don't bargain with human lives. Wait here and pray that I can fix the mistakes of your elite doctors." The surgery lasted 2 hours. Purulent peritonitis was always like walking a knife's edge. Olivia worked with complete focus, forgetting who was waiting outside the door. Her hands, the same hands Hartman had once written off, cleaned the abdominal cavity inch by inch, stitched, placed drains. Assisting her was a young surgeon sent there on contract a year earlier, who looked at Olivia like she was divine. When the last stitch was in place, she felt her knees shaking. Not from fear, from strain. This was perhaps the most important test of her life, a test before her own conscience. She stepped out into the hallway, pulling off her mask. Hartman was sitting on a bench with his head in his hands. Greg stood nearby. He had come as soon as he heard about the helicopter. He stood there in silence, arms crossed over his chest, like a guard. The moment Hartman saw Olivia, he jumped up, staggered. "Is he alive? He's alive!" Hartman sank back onto the bench and started to cry quietly, sobbing, smearing tears across his wrinkled face. "Thank you, Olivia. Thank you." Greg walked over to his wife and put an arm around her shoulders. "Come on. You need to sit down. There's tea waiting." Hartman lifted his head. He looked at them, at the stately woman glowing with inner strength, and the huge, calm man beside her, at their hands touching, at the looks they exchanged. And suddenly he understood that he had lost. Yes, he had a clinic, a bank account, an apartment overlooking the bay. But he didn't have this. He didn't have a person who would stand by him like a wall. He had no peace, no clear conscience. He had driven her into hell, and she had ended up in paradise, while he, staying behind in paradise, had built himself a private hell. "Olivia," he said hoarsely as she was already walking away, "I could do something. Transfer you to the capital, give you a whole department. Talent like yours is being wasted here." Olivia stopped and looked back with a faint smile. "Wasted? Look out the window." He obediently turned his head. Outside, golden fall was shining. The forest stood draped in crimson and gold, majestic and eternal. A young mother walked across the hospital yard pushing a stroller, and she nodded to Olivia through the glass. "This is my home. These are my patients. This is my husband. And what is there in your capital that I don't already have? Noise and fear? No, thank you." She slipped her arm through Greg's. "Come on. I'm exhausted." They walked away down the long corridor flooded with sunlight, and Hartman stayed sitting on that institutional bench, lonely and pathetic in his expensive coat in the middle of the wilderness, which, it turned out, judged people far more fairly than any earthly court ever could. The morning after the surgery was quiet and crystal clear. In the intensive care room where 7-year-old Danny lay, the monitor beeped steadily, counting the beats of a little heart that could have stopped forever the day before. Olivia sat in a chair by the window. She had not slept all night. She had stayed on watch, watching the fever come down. The boy's cheeks turned pink again, his breathing even out. The door creaked softly. Hartman appeared in the doorway. In the last 24 hours, he had aged 10 years. His suit was wrinkled, his tie was gone, gray stubble covered his cheeks. In his hands was a cup of water, and the water trembled inside it. "May I?" Olivia nodded. He walked over to his grandson's bed, dropped to his knees right on the linoleum, and carefully touched the sleeping boy's hand. "He's breathing," Hartman murmured, and in that simple fact, his whole universe now seemed to rest. "His temperature is normal. In a week, he'll be running around." Hartman looked up at her. There was no polish left in his eyes now, no arrogance, only emptiness and bitter realization. "Why?" he asked. "After everything I destroyed you, threw you into the snow to criminals, thought you'd disappear, and you saved the most precious thing I have." Olivia stood and walked to the window. Beyond the glass, the settlement was waking in the morning mist. Smoke rose from chimneys. Dogs barked in the distance. This was her world, alive, real, requiring no pretending. "You still don't understand," she said, calling him by his name for the first time. "I saved him not for you and not for myself. I saved him because I'm a doctor. Do you remember the oath? Not the one they recite at graduation just for show, the one inside." She turned to him. The sun rising over the forest lit her face. "And one more thing. You said you destroyed me. You're wrong. You gave me a life. Back there in the city, I was a function. An endlessly tired woman with an empty refrigerator and lonely evenings. I saved people, but I myself was dying from emotional cold. You sent me to the place where I learned how to get warm. You gave me this forest, these people. You gave me my husband." Greg appeared in the doorway of the room. He had come to visit his wife, carrying a hot breakfast in a thermos. When he saw Hartman on his knees, he stopped without coming in, but his presence immediately filled the room with calm strength. Olivia smiled at her husband with her eyes alone and continued. "If it weren't for your cruelty 10 years ago, I never would have learned what it means to be truly happy. So I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I'm not holding on to any anger anymore. A happy person doesn't have time to hate." Hartman slowly rose from his knees. He looked at Olivia like someone staring at the very thing he had tried to destroy, only to see that it had survived. He slipped a hand into his inner pocket and took out his wallet. "I want to build you a new wing. The most modern equipment, a CT scanner, whatever you want. Let me at least buy my way out, since I can't make it right." Olivia shook her head. "We don't need a CT scanner. We have everything necessary for emergency care, and we send the complex cases to the county. But if you really want to do something, buy us a proper ambulance, a good one built for rough roads, so our people stop dying in the backs of trucks on the way to the hospital." "Done," Hartman said quickly. "Tomorrow, 2 fully equipped ambulances, I promise." He stood there another minute, not knowing how to leave. Then he bowed awkwardly. Not to her, but to somewhere out in space. Maybe to the God he had never believed in. Then he quickly walked out of the room. 3 hours later, the helicopter once again kicked up a cloud of dust over the hospital yard. Danny, now conscious and giving Olivia a weak smile, was loaded inside. Hartman paused by the boarding step. He walked over to Olivia and Greg, who were standing side by side, holding hands. "Goodbye. I'll try to live differently." "Try," Greg answered in his deep voice. "It's never too late to become a human being, even if you're a boss." The helicopter roared, lifted off the ground, and carried the visitors back to their busy, cold world. Olivia watched the shrinking dot in the sky. The wind played with her hair. She felt a huge, invisible weight slide off her shoulders, a weight she had been carrying for 10 years. The hurt, the anger, the need to prove she had been right, all of it flew away with the helicopter, dissolved into the blue sky. All that remained was silence and the warmth of Greg's hand in hers. "So home?" Greg put an arm around her shoulders. "Your soup's getting cold, and you haven't eaten right in a full day." "Home," she said, pressing her cheek to his rough sweater and breathing in the familiar scent of pine. "You know, let's heat up the bathhouse tonight. Warm our bones?" Greg laughed. His laugh sounded like rolling thunder, powerful and kind. "We'll heat it up, steam some birch switches, and drink mint tea. That's enough heroics." "A doctor can't live without heroics," she said with a smile. "But today, I'm just a wife." They walked slowly down the village street. The locals greeted them, taking off their hats, asking about the boy's condition. To these people, Olivia was not just a doctor. She was part of their land, part of their lives. That evening, when the sun went down behind the treetops and painted the sky crimson, Olivia and Greg sat on the porch of their home. An old dog dozed at their feet. Steaming mugs of herbal tea warmed their hands. Olivia looked out at the forest, dark, endless, majestic. She remembered the day she had arrived there scared, lonely, shivering from the cold. She had thought it was the end. It turned out to be the beginning. Fate, like a wise surgeon, sometimes hurts us in order to heal us. It cuts away the excess, pride, noise, false friends, and leaves only the essence. "What are you thinking about?" Greg asked, covering her hand with his. "I'm thinking that the cold isn't outside. The cold is inside, and you can't buy medicine for it at a pharmacy." "Then where do you get it?" "Nowhere. You can only find it, the way I found you." She rested her head on his shoulder. Inside the house, an old clock ticked away the time of their happy autumn. Somewhere far away in the big city, neon lights were glowing, cars were roaring, people were chasing phantom success. But here, at the edge of the world, two people sat in silence about the things that mattered most, warming each other with the heat of their hearts. And in that warmth, there was no room for pain or fear or the past. Only love, simple as bread and eternal as this forest. Life often sends us into exile so that we can find ourselves there. Real wealth is not bank accounts and high positions, but a clear conscience and the warm hands of the person you love. Forgiveness is not a gift to the one who hurt you, but the freeing of your own soul. Only by letting go of evil do we make room for happiness. If this story moved you, write in the comments whether you could forgive the person who broke your life. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Until next time.